Generations. We hear the terms thrown around all the time: baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z. But what's the real story behind these names? Where did they come from, and why do they carry so much weight in shaping how we view different groups of people? Is there something more to these generational labels than just a simple way to group people by age? Generational names have become more than just markers of time. They've become symbols of identity, culture, and even conflict. Each generation is often shaped by its own unique set of circumstances: wars, economic shifts, technological advances that influence not just what happens during their lifetimes, but how they are perceived by others. Yet the story behind how these labels came to be is a lot more complex and a little more mysterious than you might expect. Take, for example, the name baby boomers. On the surface, it seems straightforward: a large population surge after World War II. But the term itself carries a whole lot of cultural weight. It was coined by social scientists and media outlets in the 1950s to describe the post-war generation born between 1946 and 1964. But the boomer moniker quickly became more than just a demographic description. Over time, the term began to evoke a specific cultural identity, one tied to consumerism, the rise of suburbia, and a rapidly changing society. But is that all there is to it? Could there be more hidden in the name, a deeper connection to the societal shifts of the era? Similarly, consider Generation X, that mysterious group born between the early 1960s and the early 1980s. The name itself, coined by author Douglas Coupland in his 1991 novel Generation X: Tales for an Accelerated Culture, suggests a sense of ambiguity, of being undefined. Coupland described his generation as feeling disconnected from the traditional values of the baby boomers and not quite fitting into the emerging millennial culture. But why X? It wasn't just random. The X symbolized a generation that was lost or searching for meaning, one that often felt like it was in the shadows of bigger societal forces, much like the lost youth searching for purpose in a rapidly changing world. And then there's millennials, a term that has become so ingrained in popular culture that it almost feels like a buzzword. The name itself seems to make sense. It's the generation that came of age around the turn of the millennium. But what's fascinating is the way this label has been both adopted and vilified over time. Originally, it was just a neutral term, but in recent years it's become shorthand for a whole range of cultural traits. Everything from a love for avocado toast to a reputation for being entitled or lazy. How did a simple label end up carrying so much judgment and baggage? But what about Generation Z? The name itself doesn't carry the same cultural history as the ones before it. It almost feels like it was just the next letter in line. And yet Gen Z is a generation that's grown up in a world that's radically different from those before it. They're digital natives, connected in ways no other generation has been. Is there more to the Z than just being the next letter? Or is it part of something bigger? Could this label have a more profound meaning as we watch Gen Z carve out its own identity in the social and political landscape? In fact, if we look back further in history, we see that generational labels weren't always so neatly defined. The concept of generations as we know it today didn't exist until relatively recently. Before the 20th century, people were more likely to be identified by their social class, profession, or geographical region. But as industrialization, urbanization, and globalization took hold, the pace of change accelerated. Generations began to feel like distinct cultural cohorts, marked by their experiences, values, and behaviors. What's really interesting, though, is that these generational labels don't always match up to the realities of the people they describe. For example, the silent generation, born between the 1920s and the 1940s, was often depicted as quiet, conservative, and socially restrained. But in reality, this generation gave rise to countercultures, civil rights movements, and bold social changes. The greatest generation which came before them is often praised for its role in World War II. But the reality of their lives was far more complicated than the idealized image of selfless heroism. The process of naming generations has always been a reflection of society's attempt to categorize and make sense of the world. But the names themselves are a little bit mysterious. They evolve over time, sometimes taking on meanings that weren't intended when they were first coined. These names are not just a way to group people by birth year. They shape our understanding of cultural identity and influence how future generations will see themselves and others. The deeper mystery behind these generational labels is not just in their origins, but in how they continue to influence how we perceive one another today. Generational divides are real, but they're not just about age. They're about the worldviews, the experiences, and the values that each generation inherits. And as society changes, so too does the meaning of these labels. What will we call the generation that follows Gen Z? Will they be defined by the technology they use, the social challenges they face, or something completely different? This exploration into the mystery of generational names reveals how much power these labels have in shaping our perceptions of each other. But just as these names evolve, so too do the generations they describe. Perhaps in the end, it's not about the names themselves, but about how each generation defines its own story and what it leaves behind for the generations that follow. To wrap things up, we've ventured into the intriguing world of generational names, unpacking their origins, exploring their meanings, and questioning the impact they have on how we view ourselves and each other. While these names may seem like simple labels, they carry with them the weight of history and cultural evolution. And in the mystery of these names, there's a deeper truth about identity change and the way we understand time itself. If you've enjoyed this dive into the enigmatic world of generational labels, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to check out my other videos for more mysterious explorations, and thank you for joining me on this journey to uncover the hidden truths behind the names that define us.